Save the Coast, Eat Oysters. A group dedicated to restoring coastal Louisiana recently expanded the program in which it collects oysters from restaurants and puts them to use. One of the first beneficiaries is a Native American community in Plaquemines Parish.
We're water people. We celebrate, that we're still water people.
People have been living on or near Grand Bayou in Plaquemines Parish for centuries, a Native American community with homes accessible only by boat.
I think it's sense of belonging, knowing that this is home to my ancestors and that we're still here.
A century ago, Rosina Philippe says the land around this place was home to a couple thousand people. Today, 14 families remain, members of the Atacapa Ishak Shawasha. It can be difficult to imagine giant oak trees once stood on a forested ridge where today there is open water and the skeletal remains of oaks.
We call it the forest that used to be, bones of the forest that used to be there.
On this day, the small village is bustling with activity. Volunteers from the Coalition to Restore Coastal Louisiana are deploying bags of recycled oysters collected from area restaurants. After a quick boat ride, they're placed in a couple locations along the banks of the bayou, a natural form of shoreline protection.
Instead of sending them to the landfill, put them back in the water.
It serves as a visual reminder, that we're not alone. There's still something that we can do.
You really got into this.
Yeah, no, I enjoy this, man. Any excuse to get out of the house and go, do something useful out in nature is great, man.
That involves hoisting the 30-pound bags and stacking them strategically along the shore. On this windy day, it instantly reduces the wave action.
They're heavier than they look, by the way.
Yeah, no, they have some weight to them, yeah.
So there's some substance.
There's definitely, no, I mean, they got to hold them down to the base there.
Nick DeWaskin does some volunteer work, but this was his first time on a coastal project.
The amount of wetlands lost really is just staggering. And, that's within my lifetime, it's just completely changed.
This is just a few miles up the road.
Al DeVerne has been volunteering with the coalition for about 15 years.
I have to feel like I'm making a difference in something. I used to hunt and fish around here with my dad 60 years ago, and it was a very, very different looking place.
Al gives the new volunteers a primer on man's influence over this place.
But what you do see is these straight canals that were referenced before. This is man-made canals.
Canals that sliced and diced the marsh allowed for saltwater intrusion, and what's often overlooked, the disruption of the natural tidal flow. All in a delta disconnected from the river, locked in place by levees. A delta rapidly eroding and sinking.
30 years later, it has almost all disappeared.
You could ultimately accomplish a similar level of protection with rocks, but there's one big difference to this method. Ultimately, it'll be alive.
They will immediately start naturally recruiting oyster growth.
As baby oysters attach to the shells, a whole ecosystem forms, a living oyster reef with fish and birds feeding off it. The coalition says that process has unfolded in every spot where they've installed the recycled shells.
The oyster shell is the keystone organism of that reef, and it attracts a huge amount of diversity and abundance of species.
This is the tribe's second oyster recycling project.
Have you felt a sense of isolation?
Yes, a lot. Because when you're a small community, sometimes it's difficult to be heard or to be invited at the table.
So when you see these bags, these giant sacks full of oysters, what's that do for your heart?
Well, I'm overjoyed.
Nothing will fully bring back the rich delta that once surrounded Grand Bayou, but finally volunteers bring a little help to this isolated community and to nature. The Coalition to Restore Coastal Louisiana says oysters that are consumed in restaurants often ended up in landfills. Since the program began 10 years ago, they've installed over 8,000 feet of oyster reefs.